Hello, folks. This is Dragon Keeper 9600 here. I just got back from a very late showing of the 2019 live-action remake of The Lion King, and so I thought I'd share some thoughts about it with you tonight. Now, I actually wasn't sure if I was going to see this movie because I feel like out of all the live-action remakes so far, this one has had the most controversial release, whether it's due to criticisms about the animation style being too lifeless, or about just the fact that a lot of the old, or familiar, I shouldn't say old, complaints about the live-action franchise in general have kind of come to a head. About, that nobody asked for these stories. They were already told in animated form and better, so they're pointless, all that stuff. And this is maybe because we've gotten 2 of these in 1 year. People are just, really hammering home that, no, we're sick of these, we don't want this. So I wasn't actually sure if I was going to see this movie. 3 things ultimately made me walk into the theater. One was you guys. In my Latin review, I promised you guys that I would watch Lion King and review it, so here I am for you. And for me, because I love to talk. 2, there was a pool party or birthday or something happening right outside my unit, and it was super loud because they were getting super crunk. And I decided that rather than listen to the echoing beats of some pop song I don't know, it would be best for me to just get out of the apartment and see a movie. 3, was the cast. Like everybody else, I was pretty excited when the cast for this thing was announced, way back before we even saw any footage. Not only did they bring James Earl Jones back, the only actor so far to reprise the role that he had in the original animated film, but they also got, some really well-liked people, especially by me. Beyonce as Nala, John Oliver as Zazu, Donald Glover as Simba. This looked like a stellar cast. So, it was those 3 things that made me get into the theater. And honestly, I saw in a lot of reviews before I walked in that this really shouldn't be thought of as a movie so much, but rather as a kind of tech demo for what Disney animation is capable of. So then, let me share what I thought of this tech demo, as it is. Hand gesture. Now, one thing I remember thinking back way when this movie was announced was live-action Lion King. No, that's not what it is, because the other stories in the animated Disney canon have human characters, so at least there is some way to attempt to film these in live action. With this, there's none. This is basically just an animated movie, but it's marketed as live action because the characters are meant to look like real animals and not like they're animated, which they are. And I remember thinking, live action Lion King can't happen. You can't animals don't know what movies are. Okay, you can't ask a lion to readjust its position or hold for a reshoot or let the makeup guy touch it. It's a lion, and you can't dangle a real lion off a cliff. The Humane Society would have your hide. So I feel like just calling this movie live action Lion King is false advertising. That said, the animation has been divisive. Some people are saying it looks phenomenal, and some people are saying that it, again, looks soulless. And sometimes these 2 comments are made by the same person, meaning that it looks great, but there's no heart behind it. Here's my 2 cents. I kind of love it. Just a little bit, though. I'm not crazy about it, but I am impressed. Not just by the technical prowess, but also by the fact that a lot of, clearly, animal behavior or movement was studied to some degree, and it was studied for the animated one, I'm sure, but this one, they, really implemented it. The animals move and emote the way real animals would. So, Zazu, moves his head around like a real bird would, and the lions, move and pace and snarl the way real lions would, and there's a scene where Timon finds Simba and he jumps back in alarm, and the way he jumps back is the way an actual meerkat would do that. And for a science geek like me who used to watch nature specials willingly all the time as a kid and watch them really passionately and get into them, this was kind of cool, and I kind of like seeing all that work on screen. The unfortunate side effect is that they don't emote like humans do. So a lot of people were taking screen caps of the trailer and noticing how Simba's face in really emotionally harrowing moments is just because it's a lion and lions don't emote with their faces. And while I feel like for the most part that isn't a huge problem, there are some moments where it is. The biggest one is the scene that most people take that cap from, which is the scene of Mufasa's death. Now, Mufasa's death, I don't need to tell you, but I'm going to tell you anyway, is one of, like, the biggest tearjerkers, not just in Disney, but I feel like in children's films in general. Everyone remembers how crushed they were the first time they saw Mufasa fucking die. And the scene, it's a scene where it happens is, like, Simba finds Mufasa's body and he's crying over it, and, like, the child actor is clearly giving it his all. Like, it sounds like he's actually crying. But Simba's face is just, like, not, because lions don't cry, so they didn't know what to do, so they just had him making the same face that lions always make, because he's a lion. So, like, there are a few times where moments like that happen, where the audio from these actors, who are giving good performances, I was right to be excited about the cast, just cannot match an animal's face and head and body. But most of those moments, there were, like, fewer of those moments than I feared, because a lot of this movie, I think, relies on, one, being familiar with the original story, which brings up the age-old question, like, why are you watching this if you know the original? Yeah, I know. I'm not actually going to encourage you to watch this. Like, I feel like if this is the type of thing you're interested in, then you already know. What was I saying? Oh, yes. I feel like also, in addition to the context of the story, I feel like a lot of this movie relies on a little thing called the Kuleshov effect, which, if you haven't taken your film history class yet, basically Kuleshov effect is a principle in editing, whereas that basically describes how we change our interpretation of facial expressions based on cuts. So if you see a guy making a neutral expression, and you, like, before you show that picture, you show a picture of, like, a steak on a plate, and you ask the person, what emotion do you think this guy's thinking? Most people will answer, he's hungry, because they saw the steak on the plate and then that expression. So it's basically we interpret what we see based on the context around it. And Lion King relies a lot on that principle. Like, we assume that Simba is feeling happy or sad or angry or whatever because of the dialogue and what the cuts between. So for the most part, I feel like the fact that they don't emote facially is, like, papered over. I do think it's a thing that needs work, and I feel like this film is an interesting experiment. Again, thinking of it as an experiment or a showpiece and not really a standalone movie. I do see a future with this type of super really realistic animation for films about animals. But I feel like there needs to be a bit of tweaking to just, like, find the right amount of a facial expression that's human enough that we get emotion from a character by looking at them, but not too human that it gets into that uncanny valley, like the Stuart Little live action film where the cat is, like, looks like a human face and it's weird. Weirdly enough, that movie was directed by Rob Minkoff, the same guy who directed the original Lion King. It's a small world, as it were. So, okay, the technical stuff. I feel like for a lot of what I talk about this movie, a lot of it is going to keep coming back to that question of the changing animation from the cartoony stuff to the live action stuff. And I feel like by changing it to live action, you're kind of limited in terms of the tone in ways that you aren't with live action remakes with human characters. Because with the human characters, you can still get wild and crazy because it can have a kind of Broadway energy. So, like in the live action Aladdin, for example, the scenes where Will Smith is going all nuts with the genie, as the genie, is you could still keep that wild and crazy colorful energy because it's a human character. But if you try and do that with a animal character, it suddenly turns into a farce. Like, we can see a human in a circus act and it'll still maintain some kind of show business like dignity, not with an animal. So a lot of the really cartoony and comedic moments in the original film are not here because they can't be, because the new ultra serious tone in this new brand of animation just wouldn't allow for it. So I didn't actually realize before I watched this just how cartoony the original Lion King was, because when I think of the original Lion King, I always think of it as one of the more serious Disney films, not just because of the really serious death, but also it kind of deals with a serious and adult message. I'm not letting your past define you, and that it's got, you know, royal coups and childhood trauma, and like this film is taken way too seriously by the furry fandom, and I don't know, I just associate it with like and it's inspired by Shakespeare, so very serious stuff. But comparing it to the live action film, I realized how many of the iconic moments are based on really goofy comedic things that can't exist here. So for example, in the what's the name of the song? I just Can't Wait to Be King, one of my favorite songs from the original. You know the scene where like Simba starts singing and he jumps in front of Zazu and the colors all flash and it comes in this weird Technicolor landscape and there's a lot of slapstick where Zazu is getting batted around by animals and stuff. The song is still there, and it looks good, but not in the same way. It's not comedic. It's slightly comedic, but it doesn't have, like, the timing and the Tom and Jerry sadism that the original had, and it doesn't have the bright colors. It's just Simba and Nala running through the savannah, weaving in and out of animals. And I do like it, but the original is just, I don't know, it's just punchy and snappy, and it's got this timing to it that they can't do. A lot of the other jokes, like, there's a bit that always made me laugh in the original where the hyenas try to chase Simba into a cactus patch, and I don't remember which one. I think it's Bonsai jumps in first and he gets needles all over him, and Shinzi tells him, like, I'm not following him. You want me to come out looking like you? Cactus butt? And again, we can't have him covered in cactus butts comedically in this version because, one, cacti aren't actually in that region, so that's an ecological mistake. Two, tone's not right. And the scene that's hit the hardest with this is Be Prepared. And I know people were disappointed listening to the soundtrack and realizing how short and unimpressive the song sounded. But oh man, seeing it in live action, it was the first time that I felt secondhand disappointment in one of these remakes. It was bad. Now, don't get me wrong, it started off impressively enough with Chiwetel Ejiofor, who voices Scar, and I hope I am pronouncing that name in a way that sounds somewhat close to accurate. He starts off the song like with new lyrics and he's rhyming and he has a very booming, impressive voice. And it sounds like it's going to be awesome, but then it just kind of fizzles out and dies. And it's too brief. And he's just like jumping from rock to rock. Like, it can't have the cool visuals, like with the hellish red fire and the rocks erupt up and the hyenas goose stepping for some reason. Like, none of that stuff can be here in this tone and this animation, so it's just him jumping from rock to rock, shouting, be prepared over and over. And we were just kind of sitting there, like, scratching our heads, like, oh, well, this is this, huh? It reads almost like Scar forgot the lyrics, but he's trying to keep it up anyway. It's like, no, honey, just stop. So, those are the limits imposed by the animation. Does it actually bring anything to the story? Well, it kind of develops it into the more serious tone that I used to think that the old movie had, and as a result, a lot of the characters come across as more badass than they were in the animated one. One of the characters who benefits from this is Shinzi. Now, as you recall, there were 3 hyenas that got the most focus in the original one. Bonsai, Shinzi, and Ed. And I understand that Ed is not a name that fits in this region, and Bonsai is a Japanese word, and not Swahili, so the fact that they had those names is weird. And apparently the makers of this film agreed, because Bonsai and Ed's names have been changed to Kamari and Azizi, respectively, so now their names fit more in the setting, I guess. But anyway, so as you recall, those 3 hyenas were the 3 main ones, and you never got the sense that any of the 3 were in charge. Shinzi was the more competent one, but all 3 of them were comedic, and they just stood out because they had the most screen time and the most lines. In this version, Shinzi is unquestionably the leader. So there's a scene where the hyenas are quartering Nala and Simba in the graveyard, and they're cowering, and the hyenas are laughing over them. But then Shinzi appears, and all the other hyenas drop back and bow their heads reverently, and she's got this super, like, intimidating voice, and, like, she's really scary, which is cool, because it makes Shinzi, like, a terrifying, like, second in command of Scar. And it's also scientifically accurate, because Hyenas, as you may be aware, have a matriarchal societal structure where the biggest and strongest female is in charge. Here's a fun fact, actually, about hyenas. Spotted hyenas, female hyenas, have so much testosterone in their systems that they actually have dicks. So when a female hyena gives birth, she has to squeeze out the pup through her dick. And it is just as messy and painful as it sounds. So that's in your head now. But anyway, Scar also benefits from it. Aside from his pitiful performance in Be Prepared, which I do not think is the actor's fault, because I feel like he could sing it. They just didn't know how to implement it in live action, which begs the question of why they even tried. Whatever. But Scar, actually, Nostalgia Critic, who does not like this movie, has talked about this in the past, how Scar seems intimidating right up until he's actually becomes king, and then he becomes a kind of a lazy bitch. He doesn't do anything, he just sits around and whines. In this version, Scar is really competent, really scary, because they keep him in charge of the hyenas after he becomes king. Like, in the original, this film also keeps up the Disney tradition, it has become a tradition now, of having live-action remakes that address plot holes or weirdnesses in the original. So in the old version, if you recall, when Scar became king, it just seemed like the land, there was no food to be had because a drought happened, and it was the dry season, which is not Scar's fault, because the dry season is just kind of part of how nature does things out there. So it didn't, like, the main thing Scar does wrong is that he refuses to migrate to a place where there's more green. And even the other hyenas are complaining to him, like, Scar, there's no food. In this version, the hyenas are totally deferential to Scar, and the movie outright says that there's no food because the hyenas don't know how to stop hunting, so they've killed and chased off everything. So, and, like, the reason the hyenas have been banished to the elephant graveyard is because if you let them into the Pride Lands, they just keep eating and never stop, and they'd overhunt. So Scar keeps the hyenas around basically as his backup, and it's really intimidating when Scar just gives the word and like 40 hyenas, seriously, this hyena pack is huge, just descend on whatever his target is. They also added a bit where Scar is after Simba's mom, Sarabi, which, like, and the way that they introduce it is kind of creepy too, because up until a certain point, the dialogue from the original has basically been like word for word the same. But until Mufasa tells Scar, like, you know, you should have respect for my son and for Sarabi. And Scar responds like, oh yes, you know I have the deepest respect for the queen. It's like, ew. I immediately got it on the spot. And, like, Scar is pissed at Mufasa, not only for taking the pride, and it's strongly implied in that scene that Mufasa is the one who gave Scar his scar. Ooh, very dark. But also that Scar wants Sarabi. And when he declares himself king and Sarabi still doesn't want him, he doesn't take it well. And he says that from now on, the hyenas eat first, and the lions have to wait because Sarabi said no. That is diabolical. He's holding the rest of the pride hostage because Sarabi won't have sex with him. That's gross, but also, like, it makes Scar seem like a more in-charge villain when he's actually doing, like, evil shit like that instead of lying around his cave going, oh, everyone blames me for everything just because everything is terrible. I'm king. I can do whatever I want. Actual line from that movie. I actually, I'm gonna bring up science again. I just love the little nods to the actual biology and the African savannah, so I'm gonna keep talking about this because I'm a nerd. The implication that Mufasa gave Scar his scar becomes because, like, they talk about it early on. I don't remember the exact dialogue was, but basically that makes sense because in a traditional pride structure, I don't know how much you know about lion society, but there's one male and a whole mess of females. And the biggest and strongest male gets to keep control of the harem. So what'll happen is when lion cubs reach a certain age, the females are allowed to stay, the males have to go, because the male in charge does not want any competition. Now, what'll happen a lot of times is that male cubs who are from the same litter, so brothers, will travel together alone and prideless once they reach a certain age. So it's not uncommon, well, it is uncommon because lion sightings are hard, to see two or three juvenile males traveling together, and they hunt together, they sleep together, they protect each other, and they stick together until they come across a pride with a male who's old and sick and could possibly be usurped. And then one of the brothers gets to be the male of that pride, and the other has to hit the road. Now, it seems to me what's occurred is that Mufasa is getting control of the pride and has a slight breach of etiquette in keeping his brother around, which is bad. Because if you have more than two male lions around, they will plot to destroy each other. And when you first see Scar in this movie, he's like clearly not doing well. He's like emaciated, he's battle scarred, obviously, thanks to Mufasa, and it's clear that he's very bitter, and probably the best thing Mufasa could have done is to let Scar go. But he didn't, because Mufasa's a sentimentalist, and that sentimentalist has gotten him killed. So yeah, I actually do like how they handled Scar. A lot of his dialogue is the same, but it has that slightly more intimidating edge. And especially after seeing how they mangled Jafar and Iago in the last film, seeing Scar actually be scary and charismatic is pretty cool. They actually bring in some political commentary with it, which isn't present or is like less emphasized in the original. Even though I say too much, I'm sorry. Even though they cut out the goose stepping in the, that was in the Be Prepared number, Scar does come across as like more of like a satire of real leaders. For example, so basically this is a guy who is a charismatic, pathological liar who lies about stuff that other witnesses were around for, but says it with such bold-faced certainty that you assume he must be telling the truth, who has not only favored his own group at the expense of others who's sworn to protect, but also has put a lockdown on news. So Zazu in this version is kind of he tries to give like the report of what's going on in the Pride Lands the way he does in the original. There's a scene where he tries to do that to Sarabi, and he gets chased away by the hyenas, and this has been applied to have been going on for a while. So they actually chase their main source of information away to keep the lions in the dark. Pathological liar, charismatic, trying to put a damper on journalism. If any of this sounds familiar, then congratulations, you have not been in a coma for the past 3 years. I don't know if I can outright say that Scar is meant to be a parody of Trump. Clearly the exact pastiche isn't there, because he would be talking like him and have a terribly unkept mane. Oh wait, he does. And he would be way fatter than he is, and uglier. But it's hard not to draw that parallel, especially when they introduce the lockdown and information thing. Like, I don't know, maybe it's because it's already in my brain, but it kind of comes across that way. However, for all the characters that had the badass upgrade, weirdly the one who benefits from it the most is Zazu. And I know how crazy that sounds, because Zazu in the original was just a pure comic relief character. He, several jokes were made at his expense just about how useless he was when he gets smacked in the wall by Scar when he tries to go for help and getting pounced by Simba. A scene that still happens in this version. And just being useless and twittery and old Mr. Beanish. In this version, it seems like it's gonna be that at first. And Zazu just has like a stiff upper lip kind of personality that maybe even more so than he did in the original. There's a scene where like Simba and Nala want to go to the elephant graveyard, and Sarabi's like, take Zazu with you. And they're like, oh man, because Zazu's supposed to go along for protection. And while he was like following them and twittering at them, I'm like, oh yeah, I feel real fucking safe now that Zazu's here. God, if anyone tries to kill us, you'll crack a walnut at them or something, you fucking bastard. But no, like, when they ditch him and they arrive at the elephant graveyard, Shinzi shows up. She's being all scary and hyena-ish, and she's about to pounce on Simba. Zazu actually flies in and gets in between her and Simba. says, "Leave him alone, Shinzi," which is badass. But then when Shinzi tries to leap at him anyway, Zazu, like, flies right up at her and starts to peck her eyes out so the kids can get away. It's like, dude, you went right for the eyes. You just got your ass kicked by John Oliver. It was kind of awesome. It's like, okay, now I see why they kept Zazu around. Like, I have no idea what Zazu was for in the original, but now I totally get it. He's Mufasa's eyes and ears, and, like, the kids are way safer with him around. There's a scene where he does it again, and this version, they actually show Nala as an adult sneaking away from the Pride Lands to get help, and she's nearly detected by the hyenas, but again, Zazu covers for her and, like, distracts them long enough for her to get away. It's like, man, Zazu's really cool. And I know I'm probably more invested in because I already love John Oliver, but it was just, I don't know, it was just exciting to, like, see this guy who got shat on so much in the original, like, actually contribute and, like, in a respectable way. And there's, like, in the scene in, I already talked a little bit about I Just Can't Wait to Be King, but the scene where the kids, like, it's played out more, instead of, like, the Disney acid sequence it is, where they're just kind of teleporting around and things are happening. You actually see how the kids are trying to lose him by, like, darting in and out of different herds. And as Zazu's flying around trying to keep eyes on them, there's one point where, like, they vanish from sight, and he's like, "I lost them!" And, like, the way he delivers that line, there's, like, such genuine panic in his voice that I really feel bad for him, because, like, you know how panicked you are if you lose your kids in a supermarket. Imagine losing them in the fucking African savannah. Like, there is a decent chance that you will never see them again. So, yeah, I say John Oliver as Zazu is a win. For me, personally. All the cast are pretty great. James Earl Jones is great. Beyonce is great as Nala. Like, she can't just sing, she can act. Donald Glover's great. Way better than Matthew Broderick. Timon and Pumbaa are pretty great too. And honestly, I feel like the energy in the theater I was in picked up once Timon and Pumbaa came on screen, because a lot of this film is pretty similar. Like, this is the one whose script is the most similar to the original. To the point where the opening of this film made me realize that we've been throwing around the term shot-for-shot remake a bit too loosely. Because, like, when we said about Beauty and the Beast, like, oh, that's shot-for-shot the same, and like Aladdin, oh, that's shot-for-shot the same. No. The opening to this film is actually shot-for-shot the same. Like, the same animals, the same angles, the same timing. Like, the same scene of the elephant walking out with all the birds on his trunk and the little pheasant thing that nearly gets stepped on, and the shot of the ants running across, the leafcutter ants running across the tree, and, like, the zebras going underneath. Like, it's the same. And I know it's like, if you've got something perfect, then why mess with it? Well, if you've got something perfect, why remake it? So, like, I feel like the audience was kind of passively following along with a lot of the stuff until Timon and Pumbaa arrived. Timon and Pumbaa actually brought some energy into it, because I feel like they were allowed to ad-lib their stuff instead of just having to read the same script from the original. So a lot of their lines and jokes were stuff that we hadn't heard before. And yeah, it followed the same basic formula. They're the same characters, but we're like, oh my god, we're hearing different words. It's so stimulating. Like, we wouldn't be grasping at that if we weren't already, like, in a drought of humor and a famine of originality. But because they came in and they were different, it worked. I do feel like, even though they couldn't go as cartoony as they could, Timon and Pumbaa still stayed funny, mostly through their dialogue. But also, I don't know which one of it is. Maybe it's Seth Rogen. I think Seth Rogen voiced Timon, or maybe it's the actor who does Pumbaa, but one of them has, like, a really girly scream that's just really funny. And I know screaming is, like, the lowest form of humor, but I'm a millennial, so I think it's funny. Like, there's a scene, if you recall in the original, before Nala appears, where, like, Timon and Pumbaa start singing In the Jungle, like the lion song. In the jungle, the lion, mighty jungle, the lion sleeps tonight. So in the original it was comedic. It was only those two. But in the new version, it's like, more of the animals that live in this grove come in and they're all singing and it's like a chorus and it's like a big thing and it honestly sounds way better than the Be Prepared song. And it's like, this is going on too long. Is this going somewhere? And it does, because instead of Pumbaa wandering off and the song petering out, the song gets interrupted by Knowledge leaping in and trying to kill them. And Pumbaa, like, I think it's Timon. Timon lets out this blood-curdling scream as they all scatter and the song gets abruptly cut off. It's really funny. And I know people are upset about the dress and drag and do the hula bit being cut, but the actual thing that they do is, again, funny, because Timon just sits on top of Pumbaa and starts to sing Be Our Guest from Beauty and the Beak. And he's like, Be Our... Because at that point, the hyenas jump in. I don't know why that scream interrupting musical numbers is so funny, but it's funny both times they use it. It probably stays funny because they only use it twice. So yeah, Timon and Pumbaa work. And I feel like a lot of the characters work, but the big problem with this film is a lot of the content is really familiar. And I feel like I've been dancing kind of from point to point, character to character, detail to detail, without giving the big overarching kind of summary of it. And it's that there isn't really much to say about the story because we know it already. The only things that we can talk about are the details. And some of these details are fun, but there isn't enough to be like, no, see this movie, give it a chance. Like, you already know if this is something. I already said that. But it deserves to be said again. If you feel like you're not interested in seeing The Lion King again in this animation, then, like, don't see it. Because a lot of the overarching story, like, certain points and themes are more emphasized, and I feel like the theme of, like, taking responsibility instead of not letting your life be carefree because taking responsibility is too hard is, like, stronger here, but maybe it's just because I'm an adult now and I get that theme better. And I do appreciate more of the scientific accuracy that goes into behavior and such of the animals. But I feel like that's, again, specific to me. I feel like not everybody's into that. When people say it's like a nature show, usually they mean that in, like, a derogatory kind of way, but I don't, because I genuinely love nature shows. I watch them in my free time for fun because that's how much of an animal geek I am. The songs are hit and miss. Like I said, Be Prepared is a miss. Hakuna Matata is a hit. I Just Can't Wait to Be King is a hit. The opening song is the same, so that's not worth mentioning. There's a new song from Beyonce in here. The full song doesn't really get a chance to bloom outward. Like, you don't get a full performance like you do in Aladdin with Speechless, where Naomi Scott stops everything and sings the solo. Like, the Spirit song just plays over the scene where Simba accepts his destiny and decides to go back to save the Pride Lands. Like, it's there and it sounds good, but it doesn't, like, it's not a showstopper the way Speechless was. The acting, like I said, is solid. With the exception maybe of John Oliver, none of the other actors fulfill their role, like, bring anything super new to the role. James Earl Jones is the same. Chiwetel Ejiofor is good as Scar, and I would say it improves the character some. Shinji's voice actress is really intimidating. Nala is good. Beyonce, I didn't know Beyonce could act, but she can. Donald Glover's good, and I love the reveal. The reveal, actually, of his adult voice has more of a punch to it, because when they're singing, like, Hakuna Matata, and then Simba jumps out like, it means no worries for the rest of your days. In Donald Glover's voice, it's like, fuck yeah. So, all the actors are good. It's just we're familiar with this material, so, like, there's only so much newness they can bring. Now, the fact that we've had this movie before, I don't think is a reason to hate it. I think it's a valid reason to decide not to see it. But, like, I kind of think of these movies, and I know it's not the way most people think of them, but kind of the way I would think of as a Broadway show. Because with the Broadway show, when you go to see that, you already know the story and the characters and the jokes. But you're seeing it, again, reinterpreted with, like, people are playing the songs and singing them and acting, and you get different costumes and different effects. And that's kind of the way I see these live action remakes. It's like kind of a Broadway show, the same way I'd see a Broadway show. It's like the same company is licensed it in both cases, but in this case, it's a different team bringing the story to life. And I don't know why people go into apocalyptic effect over apoplectic fits, over seeing a film with the same story as opposed to seeing a Broadway show with the same story. I'm not sure what the difference is. Maybe it's because it's live and therefore more impressive, but I kind of feel like the principle of it is the same. I mean, Disney makes money in both cases, and it's the same story in both cases, and I don't know. Maybe there's just a different standard for movies. I will say one more thing about the live action animation, what a paradox, that I keep coming back to is that because the animals look like real animals, sometimes it's hard to tell them apart. And for the most part, it's not a problem because there's only one warthog in this movie. There's only one meerkat. But there are lots of lionesses, and it's hard to tell which lioness is supposed to which. Like the scene where Nala is sneaking off, I'm pretty sure that's Nala because I know that Nala shows up at the Grove to find Simba, but it might be Sarabi, or it could be unnamed lioness number 5. And that's the thing with animation is that you could like give them distinct faces and such that you can't really if you're trying to make them realistic, because realistically, like most people cannot tell multiple lions apart unless there's a significant difference in size or one of them has a tag on their ear or something. And the scene where Simba fights Scar is very climactic, exciting, but it is shorter than the original. And I feel like part of the reason it might be shorter is that they were afraid that if the fight went on too long, we would lose track of which lion was supposed to be Simba and which one was Scar. Because it's like Scar looks different from Simba because, like I said, he's emaciated, the Scar. But he, when that low lighting with dramatic back flare of the fire starting below and everything, it comes across like it would be easy to lose track if it went on any longer. And even the scene where Simba knocks him off, like, I wasn't positive until I saw the face. Like, that's Scar, right? I mean, I think it's Scar, but is it? So that's a bit of a problem. But like I said, I do see a future for this type of animation. I feel like I'd be interested to see original stories that have animal characters that are super live action. Like, I feel like if they made a Warrior Cats film with this style of animation, I feel like there would be people who are into it. It'd be harder for the furries to jerk off to, but, whatever. Or like a dramatic film about wolves or something in the wilderness that had this realistic animation because, like, people are familiar with wolf body language, so I feel like the facial problem. So, as an experiment, I think that this movie was an interesting one, and I am glad I saw it. But again, if you feel like that there isn't anything for you, I don't think that there's anything anyone can do to change your mind. Nor should you. I mean, it's your money. Disney doesn't need your help staying afloat. So if you're not interested in seeing a show like this, then don't see it. That's all. Like, this doesn't have to be part of your life if you don't want it to be. Glad I saw it. I did enjoy it as a tech demo. As a nerd who was passionate about animation and animals, it was fun. And perfectly serviceable way to spend my evening, and that's really all I have to say about that. So feel free to share your own thoughts in the comments if you saw this movie or if you didn't see it, and if you just want to give your thoughts or geek out about the original, like, I'm free to do that too. Until then, this is Dragon Keeper 96600 signing off. Asante sana for watching.